Good. And good morning, everybody. This is John Kaponi on the Govenda Show. We're going to be going through the news this morning with Adrian Pepper, CEO of Pepper Public Affairs. Just to give you all a quick warning, the news is not good. It's not positive. It's rather, how can I say, very negative, actually. So we're gonna go through them with Adrian, but we're going to try and keep our spirits as high as possible. Just a quick summary as well of today's program. Adrian is going to go through some of the stories. We're going to have a discussion with him. Then we've got Constantine Buhaya, and then His Eminence Archbishop Nigidas will join us at midday after his service on Wednesday. And then we've got Bishop Porphyrios from Cyprus live doing a blessing online to those who want to join in. So Adrian, good morning. Good to see you.
Good morning. How are you?
Shall we begin?
You're safe and well. It's good to see you.
Yeah. So that we don't bleaken the spirits of our followers today. I'm gonna start off with the Telegraph story, which is particularly horrible. And just to give everyone a summary, the headline is: Britain faces the biggest economic shock in 300 years if coronavirus lockdown extends to summer. So what's your view? If we continue like this, when we're all done for, we're all
not all done for. It's just that we face a massive contraction in the amount of goods and services that we all produce, which is what economic output is, after all. And we can see that in our daily lives. We're not being as productive as we normally are because we're not going to our places of work. And there's a reason most of us have places of work, and that's because we're at our most productive there. We're not distracted by the kids. We're not, they're often at school, where, again, teachers are being productive or more productive than they can be by giving online lessons. So, yeah, of course, we're going to see a massive contraction in the economy. It's an inevitable consequence of the lockdown, but it's all about saving lives at this point, isn't it?
It is. If you look at the report in the Telegraph, it's saying that the Office of Budget Responsibility, which is the official government body looking after expenditure and how the economy is faring, saying that this is the worst slump since 1709.
Can you remember what happened in 1709?
Well, that was the plague? What was that? What was the?
I can't remember what it was. We'll have to look it up. It might have been the SARS bubble or something like that.
Anyway, so it's saying here that the economy could shrink by 35% this spring, with unemployment soaring by 2 million to its highest level since the 90s, and it comes on top of the IMF saying that the global economy was heading for its biggest slump since the Great Depression of the 30s. So,
well, that's right. And the consequence of that, of course, is that borrowing hits its highest level since the Second World War.
Yeah.
And all this money that the government was going to throw at the north of England to its so-called levelling up agenda, whether it can still find the money for all of that, who knows? The fact is that we're going to find ourselves borrowing a lot of money, and the question is, how is it going to be paid back? Now, the hope has to be that the money that we borrow is seen as sort of long-term investment. It's interest rates are relatively low, and there seems to still be an appetite out there at the moment in the bond markets and for buying long-dated government gilts. And if you think about it, there were some bonds that were made that were sold in the First World War when the government was raising money for that have taken decades and decades to pay off. Some of those First World War bonds were only paid off 5 or 6 years ago.
Yeah.
So it is possible in times of extreme national crisis to have these long-dated bonds and for the government to finance it that way. Now, it does mean, of course, that our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren will probably be paying off the debts of this virus for years to come.
Yeah.
But we have to try and keep as many people alive as possible. Those are the values that we have as a society.
But Adrian, surely, look, if we stay in this lockdown situation until June, July, and say no no one goes to work. I mean, how long can this be sustained? I mean, surely there's got to be a relaxation for certain parts of the economy. There's got to be certain elements of the economy that start to go back to work, start to go back to even school. I mean, there's discussions about primary schools being opened in May. What's your feel? What's your instincts tell you about all this?
I think that we do, of course, have to go back to work. Actually, truth is that most of us are supposed to still be at work.
Yeah.
Everyone's seen this sort of so-called lockdown as an excuse to sort of not work anymore, get themselves furloughed. Actually, there is obviously a necessity to furlough people, especially in the hospitality and the retail sector, where the shops and the restaurants and the cafes and the bars just aren't open. For the rest of the economy, we're supposed to be, I mean, the instruction that Boris Johnson gave us back on the 23rd of March was not to go out of our homes unless we absolutely had to, unless it was necessary, and to work from home where possible. And a lot of people have taken that so to heart, in fact, more to heart than the government expected them to.
Yeah.
Why there are more people being furloughed than they expected, and there are more people who are going to find themselves in straitened circumstances than they ever expected. Because the government didn't expect everybody just to stay home. Now, I think fear has got a lot to say about that. Once you start saying to people, you really shouldn't go out for the sake of your health, and you shouldn't go out for the sake of other people's health as well, then socially responsible people don't go out, and they say to themselves, well, I will forego that extra bit of income that I would have had from going to work if it means I'm saving lives, because in this country we obviously prize life much more than we prize wealth, which is a great thing to have. But at the end of the day, we have to go back to work. Of course we do. We have to fund the National Health Service, and the only way to fund the National Health Service is by keeping the economy large. And if the economy doesn't stay large, the National Health Service won't have the resources next year that it's had this year.
I mean, surely things like the construction industry, should be allowed to go back to work. Some of the building merchants have been shut down. I mean, that would be a big boost to the local economies. I know the supermarkets are mostly open and the convenience stores, but cafes, for example, if they're operating a 1 person in, 1 person out policy in cafes, surely that mitigates against that. That helps. And if you
I think we've got to use our common sense.
It needs to start happening. You can't lock down a whole economy for months and months on end. It's total. I mean, it's devastating. It's not even.
People will start using their common sense.
They have to. Exactly that.
The simple fact is that all sorts of goods and services are still being sold online, and there's click and collect services that are available, and there's online deliveries that are available, and none of those have really been interrupted. I think it's a concern that people like builders merchants have sort of started closing their doors, because actually there was a debate at the beginning of this whole lockdown about whether the construction industry should stay open. And the United Kingdom government was very clear that it should stay open, and that it should continue to function. And then you would hope that off the back of that, the supply chains, i.e. the timber merchants and the builders merchants, etc., would also stay open, and those who are supplying them would continue to operate. But the roads have been very quiet, and a lot of those places have shut up shop.
Absolutely.
Great concern. And I think some of that comes down to mixed messaging. I know that the Scottish government, for example, was saying that they didn't want construction workers to go to work. I personally think that was a mistake. You can social distance on a building site, especially if you're washing your hands, wearing gloves, wearing masks, etc. And I think there are a lot of and I think the more we learn about this disease, you see reports from the scientists saying that it's actually quite hard for this disease to catch this disease out of doors. It's very much it's passed indoors. Yes. But if there is work that can be done out of doors, like construction work, it's a good thing that it carries on. Now, so I think that there needs to be a signal sent from the government at some point. I can understand why they're not sending it right now. Right now, it's still about staying home to protect the NHS, to save lives. But when we hit the peak of deaths from this virus,
Mm.
then and the death toll has started to fall,
Yeah.
then I think that the government will have to start sending a signal to people to say, look, we really now need you to start going out to work again.
Yeah.
Because we need to get the wheels of the economy moving.
Yeah.
And you say that cafes are shut down, etc. Yes, they are, but takeaways are not. You still can get a takeaway in theory.
Yeah.
Now, some of those takeaways will have decided that people are going out. There's no point. You know, they might be the kind of takeaways that make most of their money off people coming home from the pub. You grab your fish and chips on the way home from the pub,
Yeah.
something like that. But it would be great if you know, there could be a general signal that we expect our fish and chip shops to be open. We expect our kebab vans to be operating. Because quite frankly, a lot of people are going to be fed up with cooking at home every day for every meal.
Yeah.
And we need to get, you know, a bit of money flowing around the economy.
Mm.
So I think, yes, you can do those sorts of things and social distance at the same time. And I think the emphasis is going to have to be on social distancing. Think of other large retail spaces. Let's take you know, one of those large car parks where you can go and buy a car.
Yeah.
Second-hand car or whatever it might be, or even, you know, go to a frontline forecourt where they sell cars. Now, it should be possible to walk around a forecourt looking at cars, be guided by somebody who's 2 meters away from you, explaining what the features of particular cars are, and take a view on whether you should buy that car, and if there's finance that goes with it, to be able to review that finance on your phone or on your computer back home.
Yeah.
You know, I think that those kinds of things ought to be possible.
How do we get the kids back to school? Because this is the other thing now, is that we're going to have lots of young kids, however well the homeschooling regime is, you know, exists in each household. They're missing out on being kids at school, missing out on the teacher experience. When is that likely to start happening? Because it's, I mean, GCSEs and A levels are probably this year not going to happen. It looks as though that, but primary schools, isn't it time the government started to revisit and started to look at realistically times when they can start bringing primary school kids back to school? And maybe,
yeah, I think this summer term is going to be a bit of a mishmash, quite frankly. Anyway, I mean, I suspect a lot of the schools won't open until half term. I hope that by half term, a lot of the schools will be opening up and going back to normal sort of timetables.
Yeah.
Until then, you're going to have a lot of households that will be reluctant to send their children to school.
That's the thing.
Because they don't want their children to come back with the virus and affect the parents. I mean, there are a lot of parents out there who are very scared. Not so much scared, well, many are scared for their children as well. Some of that could be misplaced fear, because children, it would appear, are pretty unaffected by this virus. Tends to be the old and those with underlying health conditions.
Yeah.
We don't know enough about the virus at this stage. Some people say that it's a genetic variation that results in some people suffering from the virus much worse than others. We just don't know, and it may be that, and there have been 1 or 2 child deaths. So that has to be weighed into the balance of when schools can reopen as well. They won't be reopened on this theory of herd immunity that was going around one very early stage. I just don't think that's viable at this point. The only way we're going to get herd immunity is through a vaccine, and we're away from that.
Yeah.
So any reopening of schools will have to be done in a way that is responsible, and that means ensuring that children who've been in a household where somebody has had COVID-19 symptoms over the past 14 days should not be going to school. Simple as that. So that the online learning will have to remain in place. That may be no bad thing, and in fact, there can be some good things that come out of this. One of those is the development of tools. I actually think that if you can keep some of those online learning tools in place, children will find their homework so much easier in the years to come.
I mean, in terms of the handling by the government, in terms of communications, we've got this daily briefing that takes place. What's your view? Is that an effective way of kind of calming people's fears and nerves down by seeing the government, or has it kind of exacerbated things? What's your kind of view on these daily government briefings that are taking place?
Well, actually, I think it's had a very beneficial effect. because what it does is it provides an authoritative source of information at a time when rumors, and particularly false rumors, fly around on social media.
Yeah.
I think, for example, this ridiculous idea that that 5G phone masts were in some way connected to this virus.
How? I mean, how is that even?
I haven't looked into it in enough
Yeah.
detail. Caught on, and when you
Yeah.
get to mindless celebrities retweeting these sorts of things,
Yeah.
You do need a government minister to be there on the spot that day, calling it out as the nonsense that it is, and trying to squash these sorts of things, because otherwise you end up whipping up hysteria
Yeah.
at a time when we need cool heads.
Yeah.
So I think it's a sensible thing to have these briefings.
Yeah.
My fear is that the trouble. I mean, what they do is they get a message out. Protect lives, save the NHS, etc. Very important messages.
Yeah.
But what they also sometimes overlook is perspective. You sometimes lose the more rounded, nuanced view that you have to take when coming to policy decisions in government. And one of the perspectives that perhaps we have lost over the last 2 or 3 weeks is the economic impact, and also the health impacts of a failing economy. There's a lot of and of people being locked down. That there is a lot of stress, mental health issues, depression, that flow from economic catastrophe. The things that flow from having to live in confined spaces are, rage and domestic abuse.
Absolutely, yeah.
Some of these social consequences of the way we're being forced to lead our lives will have to be examined in greater perspective. There'll always be lessons to learn from these sorts of pandemics.
Yeah.
And after all, this may not be the only pandemic we face in our lifetime.
Yeah. In terms of the government, the ministers who are kind of being put in front of cameras, who out of all of them kind of stands out for you? Who's done, who's the one or two names that you think have done good jobs in this, very difficult situation, communicating the position of the government?
Well, look, everybody in that government is working their socks off to do the right thing. And I think one of the things that a crisis shows you is that politicians are not actually selfish. The kind of sort of selfish individuals that many people take them for in peacetime, if you like. A lot of them are there because they're motivated to do good by the public, and I'm not going to single out any of those politicians for criticism.
No.
There are inevitably, what happens in these situations is the better communicators get regarded as the better politicians, but that doesn't necessarily mean that their judgment is the most sage. And so each politician brings something to the government, and that's why they've been appointed. And some will bring experience, some will bring wisdom, some will bring incredible brain power, and others will bring an ability to communicate. I suppose the one who stood out more than any, who combines most of those things, is Richard Sunak. However, one could also argue from a completely objective perspective that he's presided over the biggest economic catastrophe that's befallen the country for two centuries. So, and that's within about 6 weeks of becoming Chancellor.
Yeah.
Now, fault of his own, of course. But it's widely acknowledged that he's doing a pretty good job in responding to these dire circumstances.
Yeah. So just on that point, Adrian, we had reports that Boris Johnson made his first steps outside at his home in Chequers. When do you envisage him returning to kind of normal, inverted commas, work, presenting himself again as kind of Prime Minister? What's your...
he will have to take his doctor's advice. I can't.
Yeah.
How can an armchair commentator take a view on something like that? What you can do is is say that he will be a loss to the government at the moment because he provided very much a sense of direction.
Yeah.
And he was not just the figurehead of the administration, but the leader in every respect.
Yeah.
Now, prime ministers traditionally used to have the role of primus inter pares, first among equals. Boris was head and shoulders above his equals around the cabinet table.
Yeah.
It's very difficult for Dominic Raab to fill those shoes. Not because he can't fill the shoes and he wouldn't be an excellent prime minister. Simply doesn't have the mandate to lead the Conservative Party. He merely has the approval of Boris to go and do the job of chairing key committees at this stage.
Right.
It retains all the powers of the prime minister. So it does mean that the government has to be conducted in a more collaborative, collective style than it was under Boris. But that doesn't mean that they can't come to sensible decisions.
It's a wartime cabinet, and I mean, that's the only way you can describe it. We're under attack. The country's in lockdown, and
we have cabinet government. It's not a bad thing. Some people would argue in the United States they could have done with a bit more cabinet government.
Yeah.
Less presidential leadership.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a good thing to have competing voices around the same table.
Where does it leave all the Brexit talks? Because there was an article in the FT yesterday that today the negotiators from both sides are going to start talking via video conferencing about a new timetable of discussions. Is that now completely off the table, and we're going to be kind of talking Brexit maybe from next year onwards, or when delaying it?
I mean, the thing is that the impact of Brexit was to shave possibly 0.5% off GDP in the short term, and maybe add 1 or 2% in the very long term, as Britain forged its own independent trade policy. I mean, in the context of the impact of a pandemic like COVID-19, it is just tiny. And the idea that we should be talking Brexit at all, I just think is extraordinary. UK rules and regulations are already aligned with the EU's rules and regulations.
There's no change there at all.
I don't expect the UK to be suddenly embarking on a course of taking their rules and regulations out of alignment with the EU. In fact, I suspect it's highly likely that in a crisis situation, they'll try to coordinate any changes to rules and regulations as much as possible, because that facilitates trade.
Yeah.
But I think it could actually take some of the heat out of the arguments around future trade deals between the UK and the EU. I don't think the EU will stop being avaricious and asking for money for access to its market.
Right.
I suspect it will find it harder to extract money from the British after this coronavirus outbreak.
We won't have any money left to give them. I mean, we're going to be.
There's that. I think also the EU will once again be looking into itself and saying, how well did we cope with this crisis? And every time it seems to go to Germany for the money, and every time the southern states seem to find themselves pitted against the northern states. Crisis. And I just think that they're going to have to concentrate very hard on how they hang together.
We had
with an island off the continental shelf, the West, will not be of major concern to them.
No, we had a discussion with an economist with the World Bank last week about the current Euro. There's a Eurogroup meeting last week about agreeing a package to support the economies that have been hit hardest by the coronavirus, and there was a 500 billion euro package from the ESM, but with preconditions of austerity. So there's no real friendliness, there's no real solidarity there. They're saying, right, take the money, but we're going to want this, and this back from Spain, Italy, Greece, and all these economies that have been affected massively by COVID-19 and shutdown. So the European project, from what and I'm a pro, as you know, I was a pro Remainer. It doesn't exist anymore. That solidarity and the belief in the European project doesn't. I don't think resonates. If Italy they're actively removing European flags, they're rebelling against the European Union. That's a big blow. I mean, it's not the UK. It's Italy's one of the pillars of Europe. It's a big player. I mean, we were one of the big players, but the Italians are big. Bigger. They're integral. So anyway, closing on that. Anything else, Adrian? You want to kind of just say before we bid you farewell?
We talked for a long time about Europe, and I think the real problem is that the rules that were attached to European Monetary Union always envisaged that governments wouldn't run up deficits. Unfortunately, those deficits have emerged as a result of various crises.
Yeah,
it's been really where the tension lies, that the Germans have such a fear of inflation from their experience of the 1920s.
Yeah,
that they don't want that to return, and so that's why they impose these conditions, and they don't want to see their the currency in any way valued. We're going to see we've talked. One of the things I think we potentially need to worry about in the long term is the return of inflation. Governments prepared to throw everything they've got at this crisis, and that includes not just fiscal measures but monetary stimulus as well.
That's the thing.
It could well be storing up a lot of inflation in the system for the years to come.
I mean, I remember you saying this to me 7 or 8 years ago, talking about the risk of inflation, about the slowly that would become a big problem, and now it is happening. I mean, I can't see how
it isn't happening yet. It's not happening yet.
With all this borrowing in the economy, I mean, it's going to push up inflation. You've got income levels are dropping, unemployment is growing. That's a big boost or for inflation. I
think that's right. I think where you have a supply shock like this, we haven't had a supply shock for a long time. Unless we can make it a V-shaped recovery, unless we can actually get that bridge across to return to the kind of output levels that we were achieving in December, January, February. If we can achieve that in May, June, July, that's great. Then it's a V-shaped economic shock.
People saying though, Adrian, that there's going to be, that's why your point at the beginning that buying undervalued stock now is a smart thing to do, because they're saying that the boost. Well, you said something at the beginning, something similar to that. You said now there is, there are good investments out there. There's a lot of commentators are saying though that at the end of this crisis, the boost to the economy will be so big, so big that we'll see huge amounts of growth coming into the economy. So that may happen. I think that'll be kind of possibly July, August when we see the end of this crisis, and you'll see the economy bouncing back. I mean, let's be positive.
I just think it's really hard to predict. I mean, and one of the ways in which you can see how hard it is to predict is to see what the stock market does each day. It seems to move all over the place because we don't really know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And the idea that there could be undervalued stocks out there, it could be that we're going through a dead cat bounce at the moment.
Yeah.
I don't know. And you often, it's great to look at graphs afterwards and say, look, why didn't we see it? But it's much easier to see these things in hindsight.
Yeah.
I mean, I just think that monetary financing, this idea of printing money in order to just keep the government going, you do end up eventually where Weimar Germany, or where Zimbabwe under Robert Mugabe ended up, which is completely devaluing your currency. Sound money requires that the currency retains some value, even if your output has fallen massively off a cliff.
Adrian Pepper, thank you very much for your contribution this morning. We'll see you tomorrow morning, hopefully, and we'll catch up with the news headlines from your perspective tomorrow morning. Have a good day, and we'll speak to you soon.
Thank you. Goodbye.
That was Adrian Pepper, CEO of Pepper Public Affairs, giving us his look at the news this morning. Adrian is a very experienced political commentator and advisor to governments, to religious institutions. He's a trained accountant as well. He's worked inside government as well, so I'm always glad when he can allocate some time to come and kind of give us his insight on some of the news stories of the day. So next on, we've got my good friend Constantine Buhaya, who are waiting to join us on the call. So we're just waiting for him to join in. He's going to be looking at some news stories as well, and we'll see what his version of the stories are. Let me just text him now. Yeah, so it'll be good to see some of your comments as well. If some of you have some comments that you want to make or some views, please text them over on Facebook or on YouTube. We will look forward to kind of reading some of your comments online as well. This is the first kind of proper, fully live show that we're doing this morning, and then we will go to His Eminence Archbishop Nigidas at around midday to have a chat to him. At that time, be good for you guys to kind of send some questions over, some comments about what he's saying, so that'll be good as well. So if we can get just waiting for Constantine, but it's interesting to see all the different perspectives on the crisis as well. So really, it's an opportunity for everyone to kind of express their views on the current crisis, to see what's going on in terms of the economy and society as well. So let's see where we are. Yeah. So I think the next story we're going to be looking at is we'll be looking at the kind of, again, COVID-19, but we'll look at let's look what stories we've got coming up. So the pressure mounting to reopen primary schools by May half term after catastrophic economic forecast. So there is mounting pressure by ministers within the cabinet to try and get primary schools to reopen. I think it needs to happen. I can't see, why primary schools, for example, are staying closed, indefinitely. I understand with secondary schools, but primary schools should start coming back. So let's see where Constantine is this morning, so he can give us his views on the potentially the reopening of the primary schools. Well, we might take a quick break and then we'll be back. Okay, we'll do a 5-minute break and we'll be back. Good morning, everybody. It's John Kaponi again. I'm going to stop the broadcast here now so we can prepare for the broadcast with His Eminence Archbishop Nikitas. If you do have any views or comments, please feel free to send them over to me, either on text on YouTube or Facebook. But we'll speak later on. Thank you.